If I asked you who your best client was, if you got a well-known corporate client, you might tell me about them, or you might tell me who your biggest spending client was. The problem with that is, like we talked about before, it's all based on emotion and assumptions. They give you loads of work, so that means that they must be your best customer, right? Well, no, that's wrong, completely wrong. And I bet at the end of these videos, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about, and you'll hopefully agree with me. This is exactly how I used to think. And there was a time in my early career when one of our main clients was a construction company. They gave us quite a lot of work, so we didn't really want to upset them. We actually started to bow down to anything they told us because we didn't want to upset them. They wouldn't pay us on time. In fact, it seemed to average out that we'd complete around 4 projects for them before we'd get paid for the first one. And these projects weren't just a few days; they lost to 4 or 5 months each. But we didn't say anything because we wanted to keep them happy. But then they also started to stop us from getting other work. We'd be working for other companies, and they demand that we go to their sites, threatening that if we didn't go, they not give us any more work. So it was really hard to grow the business because they had this kind of hold over us. If we didn't go along with them, our other clients didn't give us as much work as they did, so we couldn't really afford to risk upsetting them. Well, that's how we thought at the time. But then the final straw was when we heard that the owner of the company had been spreading false rumors about us to these other clients and to their competitors to try and stop us from getting any work from them. It was actually one of his employees that told me about it. So that was it. When I heard about this, we made a few phone calls and found out it was true. And that afternoon, we just walked away from this firm's contracts and started legal action against them. The strange thing is, we were really struggling to grow before that. But as soon as we cut ourselves free of them, we got loads of business from other companies that we hadn't even considered before that. And we actually found out later that we were being associated with this old client as being like them. And the rest of the market actually saw them as cowboys, even though we didn't know at the time, obviously, because they'd do a contract and then they'd send in an invoice for twice or 3 times what they'd quoted. So the outside world thought we were just the same way as them. So that was the big lesson learned from that. And after that, we never let any client make up a large portion of our total sales or dictate how we'd work and when we get paid. So the first exercise we're going to look at is to see who your clients are and how profitable they are. And when we say clients, we're also going to look at how profitable your contracts are as well. And this shouldn't be an exercise you do now and then just forget about it. This should be an ongoing exercise that you update every month, keeping track of how profitable each client and contract is. And just like we did last time, we're going to measure this based on gross profit margin. So we'll do a quick recap of how to calculate that now. So we have a client or contract, and let's say the sales value, excluding tax, is 10,000. Now, bear in mind, all of these costs are how much it costs your business. So if it's a member of staff, then you have wages, but you have national insurance for that individual as well. If it's raw materials, then it's whatever the cost is for you to buy that material from your suppliers. The labor cost of delivering what was required is 6,700 in this case. There's raw materials of 700. Equipment cost, perhaps we have some special equipment that we used just for that client, and that cost was 800. And then we have a vehicle cost for the time of serving that client, and the cost was £40. So the total cost is 8,240. So if we subtract the 10,000 sales value from the 8,240, the gross profit is 1760. And then to calculate the gross profit margin as a percentage, we divide that gross profit by the sales value, and that gives us 17.6% gross profit margin. The next thing I want to talk through is what sectors or industries those clients you listed come from. There's 2 things I want to look at when we do this. The first is what we would call the wider sector, and the second is the niche or the subsector. So let me give you an example. Let's say one of your clients is a hotel group. The main sector for that client would be hospitality, whereas the niche or the subsector would be hotels. You could take it even further and say hotels with say less than 30 bedrooms, for example. The idea is to go really granular with it. You might even niche it down to the type of client. So in this example, it might be a corporate chain of hotels, or it might be a single independently owned hotel. A second example, let's say your client is a cleaning company. So the wider sector, you could classify as either business services or facilities management services. And the subsector or niche would be cleaning services, or going even further and say carpet cleaning services or window cleaning services. When you've listed the sector and subsector, you can then analyze how much revenue you take from each sector and subsector and how profitable each sector and subsector is too. You might be surprised at what you find. So now that we've identified how profitable each subsector is, the next step is to look at demand from each client and each sector. As we did in the product demand exercise previously, by plotting out throughout the year how much demand we get from each client and each sector, we'll be able to make better decisions and actually predict what our revenue will be throughout the year. So as I mentioned previously, when we do this, rather than just taking our sales figure for each client, instead we want to try and use figures based on inquiries from the market, as that tells us what demand there is in the market. Whereas if we use the sales figures, we wouldn't know if one of our competitors was just reducing their prices 1 month. So I hope you've seen some interesting facts about your business after doing that exercise. But apart from discovering these little insights, why do we need them, and how can we best use them to grow the business? Well, when we know this data, it becomes a bit of a game because we've just learned one of the rules to playing the game. So how can we use this information? Well, from the data that you've discovered, you'll have learned some valuable insights, hopefully, about your business and about the people that you work for. It's up to you how you do this and how you want to use the information. But I want you to pick 3 subsectors that you're going to focus on with your business from now on. The rest of them you're not interested in. You might come back to them in the future, but for now we'll just focus on the 3, and we'll work on growing those. You might want to slowly wind the rest of them down, but you definitely won't do any kind of marketing or trying to attract any more sales from those sectors that you haven't chosen. Choose those sectors based on what criteria is most important to you, but using the data that's in front of you. You might choose a subsector that has the highest revenue. You might choose a subsector that contributes the most profit compared with its percentage of revenue. Or you might choose a subsector that has the highest gross profit margins. If you have overhead that's needed for one subsector specifically, then dropping that subsector would obviously also reduce your overhead costs too. So that might be a factor in your decision. Likewise, if you have to employ people to manage your client account on the phone, and there's one subsector that's just really demanding and takes up all your time, then perhaps that's one of the subsectors you'll decide to drop. Maybe you'll look at what's happening in each subsector. Is it seasonal, or is there a steady workload throughout the year? That might influence your decision as well. Or if you have one subsector that's seasonal, perhaps you'll combine that with another subsector that drops off during the busy season of your seasonal sector. And what you'll find by doing this is you'll free up some resources, you'll have more time, and you'll probably make almost the exact same amount of profit that you did before. It comes down to that 80-20 rule that we talked about in the other video. So after doing that exercise, you've chosen your 3 subsectors. The idea is to focus on one at a time, starting with your first choice, and create a branded identity for that subsector. What this means is you'll think of it like it's your own company. You'll have a dedicated website. You might have a dedicated logo just for that subsector. The reason behind this is because you want to make them see how specialized your support is. It's created specifically for them. And on your website, you'll create your product offerings that we looked at previously, and you'll create them as a package just for that subsector. After you created your niche subsector offering, the idea then is to dedicate resources to growing it. You'll focus your efforts solely on developing this subsector until you've developed it large enough to be employing enough staff, so to remove yourself from that process. You'll run this like you'd run a separate company, so it has to be sustainable. You can share staff from other parts of the business, but that resource must be allocated to the subsector for a specific period every week. And ideally, if you'll have a marketing employee, that person will be dedicated 100% to this subsector. How much you want to grow that subsector before moving on to the next is really up to you, but be standalone and sustainable. I'd look at having around 6 delivery staff and 1 person coordinating everything within that subsector before moving on to the second choice of that subsector. And this is the cycle. It's just a rinse and repeat cycle. When you finish the first subsector and you've completely freed yourself up, start on developing the second subsector. And by the way, this doesn't mean that you can't work for that second or third subsector whilst this is going on. If new customers come to your business from those sectors, that's fine. But this is just about developing that subsector and dedicating staff and resources to developing it. It's about where you're focusing your time and energy. So when you've finished developing that first subsector, then it's time to go through the exact same process with your second subsector choice. Create a second dedicated brand and website, and this again will act and operate like a second company. And when you've done that, again, package the product offerings up to suit that subsector as if you're talking specifically to them, and then dedicate marketing and sales staff to driving that subsector. Again, it's just a cycle. So when you've reached that sustainable point again, and you're no longer needed to run the first or second subsector, and you've got staff dedicated to them both, you can then start your third subsector. And when you reach this point, you'll know how to do this blindfolded. But again, when you reach a happy point, again, you can then create a fourth subsector, which by that point could be a neighboring subsector to those you're already supporting. This is the foundation of one strategy you'll use to grow your business from now on. We'll talk about other strategies later in the program, but what you learn in the program from now onwards will build on and keep improving this strategy. One thing that people ask me about when I talk through this strategy is they want to know why it can't be done all at once. And it can be done all at once, but it needs that dedicated resource allocated to each subsector. If you've got the money and the staff that you can dedicate to doing all 3 at the same time, then go for it. But also worth considering is how much of your own time as the business owner will be needed with each one. Sometimes it's best to focus on one and then move on. If it were me, I'd look at doing a new sector every quarter. And that way, by the end of the year, you'll have all 3 operational properly within 12 months. And you should have achieved a lot of growth as well as extra profit to pay for that development work in that time. With everything else happening in this program, though, it might be best to focus on one subsector so that you can work on the other areas of the business as well. Those other 15 pillars.